It's taken a while for the Vikings to officially introduce Kevin O'Connell as their new head coach, but Minnesota is hoping it's worth the wait. O'Connell, fresh off a Super Bowl win with the Rams, will now look to replicate that success from L.A. to the Twin Cities. He's reached an agreement roughly 2 weeks ago, but couldn't officially take it until after the Rams season had ended. Embarking on his first head coaching job after stints as an assistant with the Browns, 49ers, and now Commanders, where he served as OC in 2019. Under 36 years old in his watch, I should say, the club averaged 372 yards per game, which was ninth in the NFL, and just over 27 points per game, which was tied for seventh. All right, let's bring in our Jason La Canfora to talk about Kevin O'Connell and this Vikings pairing. Jason, if I were to ask you how he's able to make the Vikings a playoff team next year, what would that look like?
Well, I mean, they weren't that far off this year, right? I mean, we've got an expanded, some would say diluted, playoff field. And the NFC is, I mean, you want to talk about up for grabs, or at least as we start talking at the very beginning of this offseason, not a lot of teams that you would look at and say that's a Super Bowl favorite. So that bodes well for him as well. And if Aaron Rodgers does get traded out of that division, then I think a lot of people would look at the Vikings as the most likely team to win the NFC North. So right place, right time has something to do with it. That's a team that has some blue chip talent. Now, they certainly have to congeal. They have to stay more consistent. That's a team that could not finish games but started games quickly. But he has a very different personality, much more people-friendly, much more self-aware than Mike Zimmer was. And the Vikings are banking on some of these gains coming from the term, a new culture, but one that's more player-friendly, that's more receptive to other people's ideas. And if you're looking for somebody who's sort of the diametrically opposed coach to Mike Zimmer, Kevin O'Connell on the offensive side of the ball with his leadership style at age 36 would be the opposite.
At 36 years old, becomes the second youngest head coach in the NFL, only behind his former boss, Sean McVay. All right, so we talk about this pairing now, not only with the Vikings, but a pairing with Kirk Cousins for Kevin O'Connell. Now, his first year with the Vikings will be Cousins' last under his current contract as Minnesota's quarterback. But, Jason, we do know that it's not like they don't know each other. If you go back to 2017, of course, they were paired together. And take a look at the stats for Kirk Cousins with O'Connell as his quarterback coach with Washington. Those are pretty good numbers. What do we anticipate these two will do now that they're together again?
Well, yeah, there's familiarity there. Obviously, you've got Cousins, who was drafted by Kyle Shanahan, and this whole Sean McVay coaching tree falls under Kyle Shanahan. These guys were all Kyle Shanahan's assistants in Washington when Kyle was the offensive coordinator, and his dad, Mike, was the head coach. So the concepts, the ideas, the philosophies are going to fit. And you're right, Cousins played well, played better than RG3 in Washington, and that led him to some franchise tags and ultimately a huge, fully guaranteed 3-year deal with Minnesota that's since been extended. So all that bodes well, but the reality is, Tommy, as you said in the intro, Cousins has 1 year left. Ownership's been paying him about $35 million a year, 33, 35, 38, the last 4 or 5 years, and they don't have anything to show for it in terms of really signature wins or long playoff runs. So the real question here is going to be, how long does the Wilf family want to keep paying Kirk Cousins to be a, I don't know, somewhere between the 11th and 16th best quarterback in the league? Or are they ready to pivot to a different model that includes a younger quarterback making peanuts? And that's ultimately where I think this is going, albeit perhaps not this offseason.
All right, so you think that's where it's going. What about the rumblings perhaps that maybe another high-priced quarterback like maybe a Deshaun Watson might fit in Minnesota eventually?
Yeah, Deshaun Watson right now is still mired in a legal and civil quagmire. He may be facing some further issues in terms of what's going to happen with the class action suit that he's facing on the civil side. There's also an ongoing investigation into potential criminal charges. Nobody's trading for Deshaun Watson right now. He's set to make $35 million this year. That's a far departure from the $10 million last year. The contract's at a different point in the road. there's no more clarity as to what he may or may not have done here and what he may or may not be facing. He hasn't settled with these accusers to this point. And I got news for you. We're less than a month away from the league year opening. So I don't think there's a single team in this league that, as they're doing their free agency planning and they're starting to set their budgets and they're starting to set their targets for how they're going to improve this. I don't think there's a single team in the league that is banking plan A or even plan B around Deshaun Watson right now, including the Houston Texans.
Let's end with the defensive side of the ball. They're going to turn to Ed Donatel. Again, a few years ago, this was their calling card of strength. They kind of aged up, maybe aged out. Jason, what do we think about the defense under Donatel?
Well, I mean, it's not a surprise. You go back to a year ago, Brandon Staley leaves the Rams as defensive coordinator to become head coach of the Chargers. Brandon Staley is a disciple of Vic Fangio and Ed Donatel. That's a kind of defense that they have been running there. And even when Raheem Morris came in to replace Staley, it was about keeping as much of those defensive philosophies and core principles in place. Donatel's been a coach for 42 years. Kevin O'Connell's only been around for 36. So often when you have these very young head coaches, whatever side of the ball they're on, the opposite side usually is a very experienced, long-time coordinator, if not a former head coach. And again, it's a Vic Fangio defense. That's something that a lot of people on that McVay-Shanahan family tree believe in strongly. And it's somebody who has more coaching experience, again, than Kevin O'Connell has years on the planet. So I get it. It makes sense. But certainly there's work to do.
Jason, certainly appreciate it. Thanks for breaking it down here in HQ. Want to remind you about the Pick Six podcast, the daily NFL podcast here in the CBS Sports family. It's a draft focus, how the Rams' approach to the draft could influence other teams, how Bengals can improve their offensive line, and Senior Bowl takeaways. Ryan Wilson, Josh Edwards, and Chris Trapasso, the talent evaluators and draft analysts, all chiming in on the latest Pick Six pod.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.